June 1944 was a pivotal month in the Second World War. The Axis powers had long been stopped on all fronts, and the Allies combined for a series of powerful offensives which spelled the beginning of the end for Nazi Germany and Imperial Japan. In Europe, the Western Allies liberated Rome and invaded France, while the Red Army drove the Wehrmacht out of Belarus, destroying an entire German army group in the process. In the Pacific, American forces invaded Japanese territory for the first time with the landings on Saipan. A few days later, the Japanese naval air arm was obliterated in the Battle of the Philippine Sea, or as it was more commonly known, the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot. The Allies were on the offensive everywhere, and the bell was tolling for the doomed Axis nations. Welcome back to another episode of No Fighting in the War Room. He's Jeff.
And he's Bucky.
Gentlemen, you can't fight in here. This is the war room.
And today, on the eve of the 75th anniversary of the Normandy landings, we thought we'd talk a little bit about D-Day.
Yeah, you kind of have to. It's 75 years. We couldn't let it pass without it. But if you look at what was going on in June 1944, really around the world, the Allies were really starting to flex their muscles, weren't they?
Absolutely. Absolutely. There were so many things going on. In fact, there's so many things going on, and I want to talk about every one. Let's take this in two parts, all right?
Okay. All right, so we'll do Europe in this one, and then we'll follow up with another video on the Pacific and maybe even get into the CBI.
That'd be great.
All right, sounds good. Okay, well, obviously, the big one that we want to talk about for June 1944 is the Normandy landings. The most complex, in my opinion, the most complex military operation in history. Would you disagree with that?
No, I would not. And particularly at this time in the war, without a doubt, the biggest, most complex amphibious landing ever attempted.
Well, certainly. Actually, Sicily landed more troops, but it was not nearly as complex or as involved as Normandy. But you think about the stuff that could have gone wrong with Normandy and what it would have meant had Normandy failed, as opposed to Sicily. You know, Sicily, the Allied, the British, the Americans were fighting what was there. The Germans, the Italians really weren't going to reinforce Sicily. If you beat what's there on Sicily, you win.
Sure, you win.
But Normandy, that's a continental operation. That's a continental landing with the potential for the Germans to reinforce from all over Europe. You're getting closer to the Germans' backyard. And, you know, if they choose to, they can throw a lot more reserves, a lot more resources at you in Normandy than they could at Sicily.
Right.
So go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say that, and there were quite a bit of there was quite a bit of backup.
Well,
there was a number of panzer divisions that were available to be deployed, and they weren't.
Well, and we'll get into that as to why they weren't. But you think about the significance of Normandy versus, say, Sicily, like you say, like we were talking about. The potential downside had Normandy gone wrong. And Eisenhower had actually written a note about, you know, that he was going to broadcast if the landings failed.
Right.
And I actually have a copy of that somewhere, but he took full responsibility for it and all that. But fortunately, he didn't have to do that. But had Normandy failed, it's difficult to see how the Western Allies could have made another attempt to re-enter the continent of Europe for a long time. Now, you had Operation Anvil Dragoon on for southern Europe or for southern France, but if Normandy fails, I don't know that actually happens. I mean, we're getting to speculation, but Normandy itself, man, that was the big deal. If it fails, the Western Allies have a real problem. At the very least, Eisenhower gets fired.
Oh, absolutely.
At the very least, Eisenhower gets fired, and you know you can't really speculate what happens from there. But let's, I don't want to get into what might have been, but let's talk about the operation itself. we're probably not going to cover any new ground because it's pretty well known. Obviously, the British, Canadians, and the Americans landed on 5 invasion beaches. The big one that you hear about is Omaha Beach because it was so hotly contested.
Right.
Whereas the landings on Utah, Gold Sword, and Juneau were not nearly so much. The British and Canadians got ashore relatively easy compared to Omaha, as did the 4th Infantry Division on Utah. But Omaha is really gets the attention, and I think with good reason. What do you think about that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, what was it? Which beach was that? Okay, I'm trying to remember what was it? The Red Easy Beach?
Well, yeah, Easy Red, Dog Green, Dog. All they divided up into different sectors for because you had 2 regimental combat teams landing side by side. You had the 116th Regimental Combat Team from the 29th Infantry Division. You had the 16th Regimental Combat Team from the 1st Infantry Division. They split the beach in half.
Right.
1st Infantry landed on the eastern part, the 29th on the western part.
Right, and that was near the Verville Draw, was it?
Yes, the Verville Draw was where the 116th landed, and that's where you're looking at, I know you went and saw Saving Private Ryan again recently.
Last night.
And that is right there on Dog Green, right there near Verville.
Right.
The Verville exit. And there are reasons why Omaha was so difficult. And I don't want to get too deep into the weeds because it'd be easy to do. But the doctrine used by the Allies at Omaha was flawed. And there's no two ways about it. Army amphibious doctrine in Europe had, like in Sicily, at Salerno, North Africa, they landed under cover of darkness. And that has its good points, it has bad points, but at least your soldiers are not landing under enemy fire because the enemy can't see them, or at least can't see them, clear enough to have accurate fire. Now, American amphibious doctrine, as practiced by the Navy and the Marine Corps, and actually the Navy in Europe tried to get Eisenhower and Bradley to go along with this, and they wouldn't do it, was to land in daylight with heavy preparatory bombardment from the Navy, heavy air support, but they didn't want to do that either. They felt like Normandy was a unique operation and it needed unique solutions, and that really didn't turn out so well because they tried to do a little bit of both. They tried to land at first light, but also at low tide, and the infantry had to go 400 yards across open beaches under the guns of the Germans on the bluffs at Omaha. But that only got a 25-minute preparatory bombardment from the Navy.
Not anywhere near enough.
Not anywhere near enough. And the ships that were employed weren't even half of what was being used at Saipan on the other side of the world at the same time.
Right.
Because the Army didn't believe in the efficiency or the ability of naval gunfire to support an amphibious landing, despite what they'd seen at Sicily, at Salerno. They just didn't want to do it. They didn't trust it for whatever reason. And that led to things like the duplex drive tank, which really didn't work out so well, especially on Omaha, which meant that the infantry landed without the fire support they thought they were going to have. The airstrike against Omaha, whereas Navy doctrine called for an airstrike right before the landing craft hit the beaches to keep the enemy's head down. Well, the only airstrike that came in on Omaha was done by B-17s. And the Navy doctrine called for attack aircraft, dive bombers and stuff to come down parallel to the beach. So they're going to hit their targets. But the Army Air Force with the B-17s insisted on coming in perpendicular to the beach. Well, B-17s fly pretty high.
Yeah.
And the overcast was about 2,000 feet that day. So they're flying above the clouds trying to hit the beach with radar. Not parallel to the beach, but perpendicular to the beach. Well, the pilots couldn't see the beach. The radar really didn't work that well. And they were afraid of hitting friendly forces, so they waited too long. And all these bombs that were supposed to land on Omaha Beach landed way inland and didn't do any good. So there was really not much preparatory fire put on Omaha Beach. The last-minute airstrike didn't work. So here come these infantrymen in these landing craft coming in under the guns of the Germans who could see them clearly, and they got 400 yards of open beach to cross. Plus, they're bunched up because the demolition teams, the Navy and Army demolition teams, only got 25 minutes to clear 16 lanes through the obstacles on Omaha Beach, and it just didn't work. And that's a result of either not going in under cover of darkness, which would have covered the approach to the beach, or doing it in daylight and giving the Navy and the demolition guys time to do their job before the infantry hits the beach. And so you can say, yeah, the Germans did this and Germans did that, but you could put a lot of blame on Eisenhower, Bradley, and the Allied planners because they tried to reinvent the wheel when they didn't need to.
Yeah. Well, that's even a more wonderful testament to the men who went ashore on Omaha and the other beaches that day. What an amazing thing that they did.
Well, and that's true because at one point Bradley was thinking about withdrawing them from the beach and sending all the reinforcements to Utah. But about the time he was trying to make that decision, the infantrymen from the 1st Infantry and the 29th Infantry said, okay, we're going to have to be resilient here, and they finally made it, or enough of them made it to the bluffs,
right,
and started, whereas the initial plan called for frontal assaults against the exits, because you could only exit Omaha on certain exits because of the bluffs, and the plan was to have the duplex drive tanks provide fire support against these strong points. Well, the duplex drive tanks, for the most part, didn't arrive. In the 16th Infantry section, they launched 32 tanks. 32 of those duplex drive tanks launched. 5 made it to the beach.
Wow.
Only 2 made it under their own power. The others came in because the ramp on their LCT didn't work, and they had to bring them all the way to the beach.
Wow.
So out of 32, they had 5. So yeah, so they started, so they obviously they have to do something. So they start infiltrating up through the bluffs around these strong points, and the naval gunfire that supposedly wasn't effective. Some of those destroyers came in as close as 500 yards from the beach and sent direct fire against these strong points. The battleship Texas used almost direct fire against the Vierville exit, and that was a big reason that the Vierville exit was open because of the Texas. So naval gunfire really proved itself again. Of course, it didn't need to prove itself again in Europe, but you'd think the Army would have gotten it by then, but they didn't. But had it not been for naval gunfire, the soldiers did all they could do. But the naval gunfire maybe gave them a little bit of oomph on those strong points and allowed them to infiltrate and take them from the rear. And that's what happened from the 29th Infantry and the 1st Infantry.
Well, what I was reading last night, and they were talking about that the Atlantic Wall wasn't everything that German propaganda was advertising it to be.
It wasn't, but it was at Omaha. It was at Omaha. I mean, the Erwin Rommel, who was, the Field Marshal Erwin Rommel, who was in charge of the defenses along the Atlantic coast, he could read a map as well as anybody. And he understood that there are certain places you can land, some places you can't. All right? He recognized that the beach gradient at Omaha was very favorable to an amphibious landing. And he constructed defenses accordingly. And now at Utah Beach, at Omaha and Utah both, the tides carried the landing craft further, or I'm sorry, not the tides, but the currents pushed the landing craft a little bit off off course.
Mhm.
That was especially significant at Utah because the 4th Infantry landed further south than it was supposed to. Had it landed on its target beach where it was supposed to land, they would have walked right into the muzzles of German coastal artillery. But
Mhm.
because the currents pushed them further south on the coast of the Cotentin Peninsula, they went to an area that was relatively undefended. And the actually you've seen the movie The Longest Day. They actually
Sure.
get this moment about right because you got Henry Fonda playing Assistant Division Commander Theodore Roosevelt Jr.
Roosevelt. Yeah.
Yeah, and he went ashore with the first wave, and they realized they were in the wrong place, and there was talk, well, are we going to go back out and go back where we're supposed to? He goes, nope, we're starting a war right here. And they
Right.
did. And that was a good decision on his part because had they tried to go back out and go back where they were, first it would have knocked off their schedule and messed up the schedule of the reinforcements coming in. But they'd have gone right into the path of that coastal artillery. So that was really fortuitous for the 4th
Mhm.
Infantry Division in Utah. The British beaches, relatively light resistance.
Right.
Their main problem was they had to negotiate some rocks. They had to go at low tide because there were some rocks. Rommel didn't have to put obstacles there as much as he did at Omaha because there are these rocks. So that was another reason for the timing at Omaha. The British and the Canadians had to go at low tide because of these rocks, because
Mhm.
demolition teams aren't going to get rid of these rocks. The American Corps commander, Garreau, I don't know how you say his name, but anyway. But anyway, the 5th Corps commander who was in charge at Omaha, he actually tried to have the landings at Omaha delayed and go in later so they could provide more time for fire support, more time for the demolition teams. But Montgomery said no. Montgomery was in charge of all the ground forces going into Normandy. Right. And Montgomery said nope. He said we want them all to go in at the same time, and he had his reasons. He was afraid that because he was offered the option of Omaha either going in early under cover of darkness or later. And he said no, if they go in early, it's going to draw all of the German reinforcements to Omaha, which would be great for the other beaches, but really bad for the guys on Omaha. So,
Right.
he had a reason. And if they went late, then he was afraid that they would be coming in too late and and the obstacles he believed needed to be negotiated at low tide. And if the water was coming in, they wouldn't be able to see them, and the demolitions guys couldn't operate if the obstacles were submerged. So Montgomery had his reasons. It really was just not a good situation either way. What would have been better, in my opinion, of course, I'm not Eisenhower, Bradley, or even a Montgomery, and I have 75 years of hindsight.
Yeah.
But I think the staggered thing would have been better. I think it would have been better had Omaha went in later, where they could provide some more time for the demolitions guys, provide some more time for the naval gunfire. But again, 75 years of hindsight, it's easy for me to say that. But there were reasons why Omaha was so difficult, and a lot of it was doctrine oriented. A lot of it was untried technology like the DD tanks. A lot of it was there was just no faith in naval gunfire in the Army.
Right. And the 29th Infantry, that was a National Guard unit.
Yes, that's a Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, and I think New Jersey at the time National Guard unit. That was their baptism by fire to roll in on Omaha Beach.
And I'm sure that it was intentional to put them right beside the 1st Infantry.
Well, according to Bradley, it was. Bradley said afterwards, it's a good thing that I decided to put the 1st Infantry there, because if we hadn't had that veteran formation, it might have gone really bad at Omaha. And that's great for him to say, and it's fine, and he's probably right. But I wonder, was he really thinking that when he assigned the 1st Infantry Division? Now, the 1st Infantry Division was probably the best infantry division in the Army.
North Africa.
Sicily, Salerno, they had done it. They were the most veteran infantry division in the Army. And they had been there, done that. So yeah, they should have been there. But you're talking about the most pivotal operation of the war in Europe. If it fails, what are you going to do? The 29th Infantry Division was green. The 4th Infantry Division at Utah was green.
Mm-hmm.
Bradley was the one responsible for those units being there. So if he was so big on having a veteran unit, why did he put the 29th? Why did he put the 4th? Because he had the veteran 9th Infantry available. They were there. They were in England. They were available to land in either Utah or Omaha.
Mm.
But he chose not to do it. And, so, I mean, again, 75 years of hindsight, but I kind of wonder if Bradley was really thinking that or not. I don't know. I can't say. And I'm not the only one to question that.
Right. Well, good. Well,
like you say, it is a good deal, or it was a good thing that the first infantry was there. It could have been really ugly had they not been.
yeah, I wonder why they couldn't have just reversed their, put the first infantry, ashore where the 29th went,
well,
vice versa.
But and I don't know that it matters. I mean, it was bad all over. It just so happened that the tanks. Well, honestly, it's probably better that it was, because more tanks had got ashore in the 29th area than did in the first. The area where only the 5 tanks got ashore, that was in the 1st Infantry's area. The 29th, they got more because the reason more got ashore in the 29th area was when the DD tanks were being tested off the coast of England. They had a naval officer. His name was I can't remember that. But anyway, he was supervising their training, and he recommended that they not be launched in rough seas. All their training had been done in calm seas. In fact, if the conditions were not ideal, training was canceled.
Mm.
And then on the morning of 6 June, you've got 3 or 4 foot seas, sometimes swells going up to 6 feet, and the tanks had never operated in that before. He recognized that. He was in charge of the battalion that was landing on the 29th sector. And 2 of the tanks went in the water, 2 of the tanks went down. He said, nope, we're done. We're taking the rest of them to the beach in the LCTs. So more of them got ashore in the area of the 29th, which is probably a good thing.
Well, and I don't think we want to. I don't think we want to leave out the airborne. There was 3 airborne divisions, right? 101st, 82nd, and the British 6th.
6th. Yep. And that is, that was they had an interdiction mission, which they performed very well. Certainly, the glider attack on Pegasus Bridge was possibly the most successful, action of the entire operation. I mean, they landed just a few yards away from the bridge, and they took it in just a few minutes.
Right, and I think they were the first soldiers on the ground.
Yeah, and so they really did their job, and those the interdiction mission was so vital because it kept the reinforcements from getting to the beach. Plus, it had the unintended consequence of confusing the Germans because the 101st, the 82nd were famously spread all over the place because the heavy flak for the C-47s, and they dropped them early and dropped them in the wrong place, and they eventually were able to rally and get their jobs done, but an unintended benefit of that was they were scattered so wide the Germans didn't know what the objective was. They didn't know what was going on.
So
So that was something that really worked out pretty good. I think it was 23,000 airborne troops were dropped. The first Pathfinders were on the ground even before midnight. So they actually landed on June 5th. But their job was to keep German reinforcements from getting to the beach, and they did a good job. One other thing that I want to talk about, and then we go to other things. A lot has been made of the failure of Allied intelligence to pick out that the German 352nd Infantry Division was defending Omaha Beach. The 352nd was a frontline division. A lot of the German troops defending Normandy were static, second-rate units.
Second rate.
Yeah, they had no
Under
mobility.
strength.
Yeah, they had no mobility, and they were just fighting in place. The 352nd was a frontline infantry division, and that's who was defending Omaha. And you read a lot of stuff, and it says, well, the Allies weren't aware of it. Well, yeah, they were. They were. In May, there are notes in Allied intelligence reports saying the 352nd was headquartered 20 miles off of Omaha. And you have to think about, if they're only 20 miles from Omaha, even if they're not stationed right at the beach, it's hard to hide all those ships coming across the channel, especially when there were minesweepers operating on June 5th in full view of the beaches. Yeah, tactical surprise and operational surprise was achieved, but the Germans kind of knew something was going on.
Sure.
And you have to account for, even if the Germans didn't get the entire 352nd there by the time the landing craft hit, if they're only 20 miles away and you're executing an operation of this scale, how can you not account for them? How can you not account for the fact that they're probably going to be there?
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, again, maybe I am using hindsight, but I feel justified in it in this one because they should have known. Because they knew in May that they were only 20 miles away from Omaha Beach.
Mm.
So that's something that I don't give them a pass on. And it says that they didn't know. Yeah, they did, which makes it worse in my eyes. So.
Well, on the date that we're recording this, it's 3 days away from the 75th anniversary, and I know this is going to be a hot topic. It's going to be in the news. I know it has been, and over Memorial Day, Longest Yard, Saving Private Ryan.
Longest Yard. Burt Reynolds?
I'm sorry, the Longest Day.
And see, I've got my Normandy shirt on, and on the back it says 75th anniversary. Yeah, there you go. I'm going to be there. I'm going to be there on the 6th.
Good.
So,
I can't believe I just said the Longest Yard on.
No, I can't believe you did either, but, what are you going to do?
Cut that out.
No, but it's staying. It's good for comedy value.
Okay, well, so what else? What else was going on in Europe?
Okay,
what about?
I want to say one more thing about Normandy.
Oh, okay.
Then we'll move along. We were talking about the significance of Normandy. Think about one more thing. One more thing about had Normandy not worked. The Soviets were driving on Germany, and there wasn't nothing the Germans could do about it. I don't care. Even had Normandy failed and they moved everything east, it doesn't matter. They might have held up the Red Army for a while, but they were going to get blasted. The Red Army was light years ahead of the Wehrmacht by this time in the war. So let's just say maybe they're held back a little bit, but they're still going to lose at this point. Just a matter of when and a matter of how. Now, you think about the Soviet juggernaut coming on into Germany. And then you think about there's no British and American military coming from the West. What's Stalin going to do? What does the post-war world look like?
Yeah, exactly.
If Normandy fails?
The world looks a whole lot different in 1950.
Yeah, it does. Yeah, it does. So, something to think about.